I'm going to organize the elective primarily around a series of kind of, here are some general principles for trying to get more out of coaching. I structured this as, I think that when you've been on the coaching side for a fairly long time, you see a lot of patterns of the way in which people like treat coaching, how they consider it, and I could be wrong, but just like, how many of you would describe yourself as like, you haven't done a lot of thinking about like how one would go about coaching debate? Like you've done a lot more thinking about how you would do the debating part, right, than the coaching part. And the reason that I wanted to give the elective is that, because coaching is it's a relationship, then you want to try and do some thinking about the other side of that relationship. Like, what is your coach trying to accomplish? How are they trying to do this? Like, what are ways that we can get more out of the relationship itself? And so I'm going to proceed through some of these general principles, try and talk through some examples, maybe give some anecdotes or whatever that illustrate the principles, and then I'll open things up for questions. Cool? Okay, so one, everyone has something to teach you. Everyone has something to teach you. I want to develop this in a few different avenues. So you're learning more than debate when you are doing debate, and when you're going to tournaments, when you're at school, when you're at debate practice, okay? And also, debate involves more than just strategy. So debate also means being a member of a community. It means being a member of a team. It means being like part of an institution and a program. And so I think that one of the things that people, when I hear people describe coaching, they almost always think of it as like, they think of it as an amount, right? It's just like, how many coaches does this program have? Or like, what are the number of coaches that the team that I'm debating has, right? A lot of times that assessment is kind of like, well, other people might have more of this thing, I have less of it. And I think trying to flip that opportunity a little bit around by remembering that there are a lot of different possible sources of coaching, okay? And that because coaching concerns more than just debate strategy, you should be paying attention to the ways in which people are setting examples or trying to kind of give you some guidance on how to be a participant in debate that extends beyond just debate strategy, okay? This happens a lot, I think, in circumstances, especially in high school, where it's like plenty of the people who you are interacting with may not be experts in policy debate or in LD. I know that some of you are participating in LD, right? And there is a tendency, because of the way in which debate is a specialized activity and does require some, like, getting better at debate strategy involves the type of specialization that you see at a camp like this. Don't turn that into, because some of the interactions that I am having don't have that same level of specialization or aren't about those things that are internal to the specific specialization that is required for debate, that therefore it's unimportant, okay? I came from a primarily local circuit debating in Oregon in the late 90s. Like, I did not have a lot of exposure to the level of national competition and kind of expertise in debate that you're getting at a camp like this. I did go to a 2-week debate camp one time. I learned a lot about that. I learned a lot from my debate coach, who was like a very competent person on the Oregon circuit. But one of the things that I think, that was a big takeaway from me there was I learned a lot from people who were not teaching me specific things about debate strategy, even when, it's like I was paying attention to them as members of a community. I was paying attention to them sometimes also as like, that there were many coaches on the Oregon circuit who were actually nervous about sending their students to debate camp, okay? Because they came back usually talking faster, using a lot of specialized terminology, and like introducing arguments and research that was pretty unfamiliar to some of those coaches, right? So like, some of the weirder impact turns, or just, it's like, I was talking about debating in front of some like stock issue styles judges even, right? And it's like, they were nervous about the overall impact of camps, You don't want to be the student on your circuit who is giving the impression that because someone doesn't interact with you in the same way that everybody did at camp, that you just like do not care at all about what they are saying. That makes you somebody who is less likely to benefit from other aspects of your circuit. And if you think about it, like a lot of the very experienced like teachers, parents, chaperones, all of those set of people, like they are teaching you things about responsibility at tournaments. They are teaching you things that might also be about judge adaptation, right? So like it can be very useful to be talking to someone who is a non-specialist because not all of the things that you are trying to do and communicate are specialized. Or you might want to learn how it is that you are explaining a very specialized body of knowledge to someone who hasn't been doing research in it, right? Instead of thinking each time that you have a judge who doesn't already know all of the things that you know about a topic area, that is a disadvantage, you can think of instead as this is a potential advantage if I have learned how to explain these arguments to this person without as much research experience in this topic area as somebody else who is expressing this solely as frustration that they like don't know all of the specialized terminology about patents. Yeah? Okay. So like try to have that attitude of there are a lot of people who are actually acting as coaches out there, even if they aren't necessarily your coach, or they are your coach, but they're not talking to you about strategy. 2, you are not trying to find one person who is right about everything. There is a pretty, I think, significant tendency, like I've noticed this at debate camps even, okay, where it's like, I'm positing for a moment that like most of you are enjoying debate camp and like having fun and learning a lot. And presumably some of that is also like you are identifying some people who have given persuasive presentations to you, or like in your elective or your lab, you're like, oh man, like because this person is really good at explaining this thing, like there is a tendency automatically to assume that then what you are trying to do is to figure out how to explain your debate preferences, your like theory of how debate works, your explanation of all the arguments in a way that matches basically that one person that you are currently most admiring in terms of their ability to explain debate to you, okay? That because somebody is right about something, or because somebody is generally good at explaining or coaching a particular argument, that must mean that they are good and right about all things, okay? This is generally not the way to approach what it is that you are getting when you receive coaching. Like, instead, you want to think about the way in which debate is anchored by the practice of argument, okay? Like, one of the things, and I'm revisiting here a principle that I mentioned in the introduction to camp, which is like, this camp is organized so that you are interacting with a lot of different teaching staff members. Have you noticed that a bunch of the different teaching staff members have some disagreements about areas of debate? Like, we use some different terms. We clearly think that some arguments are better than others, or like which arguments we think are better than others are different, right? Instead of trying to identify, well, here is the staff member who is the most right about the most stuff, therefore I will begin to use all of their terms or their preferences in my own argument, try and think of that as a pool of, wow, this means that there are a lot of different ways that you can argue well about different aspects of debate. Okay, I think that this is something that is particularly in our current era, okay, where like debate has become more polarized around the like policy versus critiques, right? The like kind of that there are many people out there trying, I think, in a way to persuade you that you are a member of a community that is actually two totally separate communities, okay? How many of you at times hear, you know, opinions or impressions that sound like they are basically the like, you're either doing one of these things or the other, okay? I would ask you to push back against that, in part because some of the people who are explaining debate in that way, or who are coaching in that way, that comes out of a personal investment that I like. One of the, just once again, kind of taking this motif of like different sides of the coaching relationship, different sides of experience in debate, okay? Like, I know that it is cheesy sometimes to have adults talk about what it is like to be in your, like, basically your age demographic and your situation in school, but like, one way to think about this, and maybe this is even extra cheesy, just like, I have watched 20 different versions of people between the ages of 16 and 19 go through the process of learning how to debate. You all have been through the experience of, you are currently in the experience of doing that once. So like, as difficult and one of the things that is like very difficult about a time period developmentally with like trying to create some independence for yourself, some separation with your parents, other authority figures like testing limits, etc. Like all of those are very healthy developmental things to be doing, okay? It can come at the expense of oftentimes you are trying to establish very quickly some very solid notions about who you are and your identity. The issue of debate polarization can play on this dynamic in a way that I think is unproductive for learning what it is that you're actually trying to do, okay? So like, if you're like, this person they're cool, they're good at debate, they're good at explaining what they're doing, here's the style of debate that they are saying is, ultimately best or is beneficial, so that's my identity now. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing that thing. That's who I am. I'm a K debater. I'm a policy debater, right? And here are all the things that are entailed from that identity. That is not like, that makes it very difficult to receive coaching from people that you perceive as not part of that identity. Coaching is something that can and should come from a lot of different sources, and rather than making that a category that depends upon, have I identified in solidarity with kind of this particular subgrouping or sub-understanding, another way to think of that is you are robbing yourself of other potential coaching and instruction, okay? Like, you do not have to agree with someone, and in fact, oftentimes it is easiest to learn from someone about something new that you disagree with, right? It's like being open to some of those ideas requires thinking of all of these different kind of aspects of coaching as potentially interconnected. There's no one debate savior, okay? There are just like a variety of different important debate mentors, okay? And I hope that like you are experiencing the camp structure in a way that has actually, like, how many of you feel like you have seen very different aspects of debate explained persuasively? Okay, so like, try to build that into a larger lesson about like, oh, when I'm out there and it seems like the stakes might be high in trying to pick the form of debate or the person who can best explain it or the person that I want to be most like, it's like, instead, think of that as everybody has aspects of what they are exemplifying that I might be able to draw on, right? Most of the people who get really good at debate, they have a fairly distinctive voice or style, right? That's another thing that you're seeing with the variety of people on the teaching staff, many of whom were very successful in debate, is like, their voices are different. If you were to watch them debate, and some of us are old enough that you probably can't find a way to watch us debate, but like, if you're watching videos of the younger staff members debate, like, they sound different, but they sound good because they have a voice. Developing a voice means listening to a variety of different people instead of just trying to imitate somebody else's voice, right? It's like, debate is a creative activity in the same way with any other creative activity that it's like reading a genre book that just kind of like copies the same exact style over and over again, right? It's like you could probably sit down and like figure out what, a book in some of the like, oh, this series has 40 books that are ghost written by the same, like, copying people's blocks, copying their style is basically the equivalent of ghost writing your own debate career. And instead you want to think about it as developing your own voice. Okay. 3, all judges are potential coaches. All coaches are potential judges. What follows from this? You should listen instead of arguing with losing decisions. Okay. A parent that I once saw comment on debate, like not a debate specialist, but somebody who had been an educator, like a teacher. Okay, a teacher is like no association with debate, came to a debate tournament and I saw them discussing and describe, they like talked to me a little bit about like, oh, I hadn't seen this before. The thing that they were like, the most startling aspect of this activity to me is that the judges talked to the team that lost first. It's like, oh, I hadn't thought about how unusual that is. Like, if you think about how often we organize educational activities around rewarding the exemplary, right? It's just like, here's somebody who's doing this thing right, okay? Or like, because this is being done right, you should keep doing it in this way. Like, our activity pays attention to the loss first, okay? It's like explaining why someone lost is considered to be a vitally important aspect of judging and thus coaching, okay? And listening to losing decisions is extremely difficult. Like, I can acknowledge that. Many people feel very emotional about debates that they have lost. Many people feel like the loss is incorrect. Like, one of the most important ways of receiving coaching is to just try and get past that mental block of, if I lost and I disagree with it, that means that this person doesn't have anything to say to me, okay? Like, that is some of the most important listening that you can do, and it is also some of the most difficult to learn how to do, okay? You have to habituate yourself to just like, okay, the result is the result. I now need to hear about the results so that I can understand what I am doing and what I need to do differently. When I say that all coaches are potential judges, okay, you can disagree with your coach about a lot of stuff, and that is helpful for understanding how to debate in front of other people who disagree with you. So like, my coach in college, I started doing a lot of critique stuff early on in college, in part because that's what I was interested in doing academically, like reading a lot of that stuff as part of my classes. And my coach, Ken Strange, who's in a bunch of these old DDI pictures for many, many years, okay, he was the coach here for 35 years at Dartmouth, like a legendary debate coach, won a bunch of NDTs, you know, created a program that was one of the best in the country. Ken, like, he was actually one of the older coaches who was better at learning to use some of the terminology from critique debate, but like, he had already been doing debate for about 35 years prior to the existence of the invention of critiques. Okay, so like, keep in mind how difficult it is to like take something that you've been doing at a very, very high level, a change in that is introduced, okay, and like, you have to be the person who is helping to adapt to that change or like adapt that terminology, right? Like, I'm a curmudgeon and I'm only 43, right? It's like, it can be tough to learn new things. Many coaches that you have who might be more experienced or who seem older or a little like, they're not like in the current meta of debate as thoroughly, or you disagree, or it could be that they very much are and you disagree with them about something very specific. In either of those circumstances, it's like, you should instead treat that as, I have a very valuable sounding board for arguments that I need to make to persuade judges who don't think like I do. Most of the meetings that I had where my partner and I would present arguments, we'd present arguments as a squad, and Ken would be at the squad meetings, and like, getting cross-exed by Ken about our arguments, because he thought about them differently and came from a different judging paradigm, those cross-exes were the most helpful in learning which arguments would be the most difficult to answer, okay? Because they were the arguments that were most likely to appear in debates where we were debating a team that wasn't debating like we were, debating in front of a judge who might be either kind of like in the middle of the road or just like a pretty different paradigm. And so having practice in advance where it's just like, I'm getting cross-exed by someone who is smart, but who isn't drinking the Kool-Aid, like, that is incredibly beneficial, okay? And instead of treating that with resentment as like, why aren't they supporting me? Why don't they agree with what I have to say? Instead, try to think about that as, there are a lot of other people that I will need to explain this argument who disagree with me. Okay. 4. Coaching results from effort much more than effort results from coaching. First, motivation is like kind of impossible to coach or teach. Like, it is not the business of getting somebody excited about debate early on. Sure, like, part of coaching is kind of like, hey, here, come do this cool thing. But when we're talking about the longer effort that is required to improve at debate, like, the coach is not the person who is supplying that. Or like, generally, it is not a great model to have the coach be the person who is trying to supply that. Like, you should want to win for this reason, or like, you should care about this because. There might be some conversations about like, why is debate important, or what is debate important about, right? Like, it is oftentimes, as discussed last night in the college forum, like most of us have times where we might be discouraged about debate. That's a fine thing to talk about your coach with, or like, I'm not feeling motivated because. That's really different than I expect my coach to be the source of motivation. Okay, does the difference there make sense? Okay. The other kind of sub point about this is everything that you do, okay, that's providing an opportunity to get coached about that thing. So literally, the less that you do, the more difficult it is to find avenues or areas to coach and improve what you're doing. Like, effort creates the opportunities to give instruction and coaching, okay? The reason that I've created this subpoint is I have often seen people, particularly in talking about like whether or not different programs have coaching, or like, why isn't so-and-so my coach, or like camp feels so different than the program that I have at home, all of which are valid like feelings to have, but oftentimes that is with the assumption that like you are not a variable in the type of coaching that you are getting, okay? When in fact, your effort is oftentimes the most important variable in the type of coaching that it is possible to receive. If you apply the above principle of like, there are lots of potential coaches out there, just sometimes they're judging you, sometimes they're having a conversation with you in the hall, whatever, then this effort principle applies to that as well. Judges who see you putting in effort are much more likely to give you feedback that is helpful. Judges who see you displaying effort to try and listen to them, even when you lose, that much more so, right? But like many times, the kind of like, if I'm judging a younger team, like their ability to kind of ask some questions that are not just accusing me of being an idiot, and instead are questions about how they could get better or what I didn't understand and why, instead of like, why didn't you understand this? How could I explain, blah, blah, right? Like trying to figure out where the differences were. All of that is an example of effort too. Like we don't always think of those as moments of effort in debate, but emotional effort in debate is important for the type of coaching and kind of reception that you can get. It's not just the number of hours that you're spending on it, it's how you are spending those hours, and whether or not you think of all the hours that you have at a tournament as also something where you need to display some effort and where your effort can be rewarded with additional coaching. Okay? This also means that effort is a feedback loop, both positive and negative. Okay, so like times where somebody is displaying a great deal of effort, that is much more likely to motivate someone to want to help you get better. Like, it is so much easier to work with someone who wants to work hard to get better at debate than it is to try and explain to them how to get better at debate from a baseline of like, given this level of effort, here is where we are going. 5, set realistic goals. If you promise the moon, you better be building a rocket ship. Okay, so like, if you walk, I have had people walk into my office and just like, debate is the most important thing in my life, I want to win the NDT. And then like a month later, they are not in debate, okay? Trying to explain to like setting a realistic goal gives someone an ability to figure out what it is that we need to do next, okay? If you are not setting realistic goals, figuring out where we are going and how we're going to get there is really, really hard. And simply setting a goal that is higher every time to try and impress someone is generally unhelpful, okay? Like the other sub-point here is that like coaching is an iterated game, okay? It's not the prisoner's dilemma, it's an iterated game. There are reputational costs. People know what reputational costs are. If I promise something to an audience and I don't deliver, my reputation is the thing that suffers. Your coach is an audience. If you are promising things that you do not plan on delivering, that you are creating an impression of who you are for that person. Okay? Like the number of times that I have seen people seemingly promise more as a, like, once again, coaching flows from effort. And so instead of coaching flowing from effort, they are basically implying that coaching flows from goals, right? Because I have set my goals high, you should want to expend a lot of effort on me. The goals are the things that you are attempting to accomplish. They are not a substitute for it. And those goals are not credible until a substantial amount of effort has gone into them, right? So like, one of the things that I will try and explain to younger debaters as well is that coaching and like a debate career in high school or in college or both is an arc. It's like, it's a longer story. It's not just like one instance or one thing that you're doing. You've got to think about it as a larger process. And so if part of that larger process is that you are developing trust with someone and trying to get some relationship with them where you are trying to meet one another's effort level and to motivate one another, then you should not start that off by making promises that you don't plan on or cannot keep, okay? Like, it is just generally a bad idea to think that because you are promising more, you are going to get more. Like, don't let the promises do the talking, okay? Let the work and the effort do the talking. This is combined with, or like similar to, are we on 6 now? Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay, 6. Don't fake it. What I'm referring to here in particular is what you know and don't know, what you are confident about explaining and not, okay? Like, the reason that this principle is in here at all is that debate teaches us never to admit that we don't know anything, right? It's like, we are basically taught in terms of process and explanation that we should always be posturing that we understand what is going on, because some degree of ethos that like displays competence is important. That is a reasonable takeaway from debate. However, when it comes to coaching, it has the exact opposite effect that it could. Like in a debate round, the ability to pull that off is like you are temporarily trying to like, okay, even if I don't know exactly what's going on, by like trying to pretend that I do, I am a participant in this debate who has some credibility, yeah? As somebody who is attempting to get coached, that is counterproductive, because most coaching relies on trying to understand what someone does not know. If you are faking what you know or what you understand, it is impossible to try and explain to you the things that you need to know. So much of coaching is meeting someone where they're at. Like, what does this person need right now? What are they struggling with? What is the next step in this area of debate? If someone is trying to basically say, like, no, I've got all that covered, okay, then coaching them is now extremely difficult. I had this experience with my own coach where he did a little like 2-day camp back in high school, and that involved teaching a lot of people on the circuit, some of whom were not particularly experienced. And like, I didn't take it very seriously because I, thought I was better than a lot of the other debaters at that little like 2-day session. And like, I was factually correct about that. But I was factually extremely incorrect about whether or not that meant that I understood all of the fundamentals that everyone was talking about. Okay, like the more that you learn a complicated area, I think you would be surprised to figure out how often it is that the fundamental things about it can be either the most difficult to explain or some of the more difficult to like truly master and remember. Okay, like you all are probably tired of hearing me talk about flowing and justifications for flowing in terms of how we are organizing the camp tournament and some of these processes. Because in part, it's like flowing, like this is a boring fundamental skill, like who cares? Like I wanna go listen to a cool lecture about competition, like I don't know anything about this textual competition thing, let me at it. Or like, I need to hear the, second hour of the DKP Kant lecture, I don't need to learn how to flow. Okay, many fundamental techniques and many things that are, like at their core stuff that is quote basic, like those are skills that are building blocks for literally everything else. If you do not ever acknowledge that you are having trouble with them, all of the other stuff that you are trying to put on top of those building blocks, like there's a reason that we refer to that as a foundation. It's like you can build a really fancy building or house on top of that, and if it's too shaky, it's not gonna matter. Okay? And like, how many of you feel like you have had a moment with a coach or with someone that you think, like this, once again, since there's a lot of potential coaching out there, I'm asking this question very broadly, where you felt the need to like basically try and fake it or pretend that you know something that you did not? How many of you have done that? Raise your hand. Okay. It's common. Like this, the pressure to do this is very significant psychologically. And so like habituating yourself to having a moment where you're like, I don't get that. Or like, you are using a term that I don't understand. Right? Remember that moment in the demo debate where it's like, how many people have had a debate that involved the word abjection? It's like 40 different hands shot up. How many people can define this term? Silence. Okay? Like, this is ubiquitous in debate because some of the skills that we are taught are counter skills when it comes to coaching. Okay? So like, don't be the person who is basically trying to just go with the flow or present yourself as more knowledgeable than you are, because it will be very difficult to actually instruct you in some of the things that are important. Okay, 7, be curious. This is similar to the point about effort, but not the same. Pushing beyond your limitations requires going against ingrained habits. Those could also be the habits of your coach. See above regarding coaches are sources of productive argument, not just agreement, okay? Like, some of your coach's limitations may be possible to identify. Like, maybe they hate critiques, maybe they hate disads, we don't know. But like, part of you being a curious person and learning to interact with the coach in a way that is productive means acknowledging that like some of the limits that we all have, okay, be they yours, be they your coaches, your teams, your programs, whatever, being curious is a habit to cultivate to like get beyond some of those limits or to push them a little bit. That doesn't mean that you have to have a yelling style confrontation about just like, why is it that you don't want to do this thing, okay? I am asking you to display a degree of curiosity in terms of like not letting the boundary of what you know or what you have practiced set the boundary for what you think you are capable of. Okay? The way that a program or an institution grows is through curiosity. Like, eventually that could be the unit, that could be you, that could be your partnership, that could be your team, that could be your program over several years. Curiosity is important at each one of those levels, and getting coached about that in part involves asking questions of people that you wouldn't otherwise ask. Eight, ask about or discuss process, not just results. Like, everybody is better off if you generally have some understanding of why you are doing what you are doing the way that you're doing it. I suspect there are many processes about like the running of a debate team that you have not thought a lot about. Like, if you think about the set of responsibilities that your coach has, like, how many feel right now like, okay, I make you the coach of a high school team. How many feel like right now they could identify all of the things that you need to do in order to like have somebody attend a tournament and win some debates at that tournament? Not too many, right? Like, this is not something that you are super familiar with. Some of the things and the ways that your coaches interact with you are like, they are produced by the requirements of that process, right? It's like, oh, I need to know this far in advance which teams are going where because that's important for our overall costs. We need to like get travel booked in advance, and that travel needs to be right, and our administrators need to know that we are efficiently using our budget. Like, that is not something that most debaters are thinking about when they are thinking about how and why their team is structured in certain ways or making certain decisions. Some of that, like, there are boundaries there that your coach may not want to cross. Like, you know, you don't like, what's your salary? Or just like, why is this, like, there are some things there that aren't going to be shared or that wouldn't be appropriate to be shared. But the like, hey, I noticed that we're having meetings in this way or at this time, or like, this is how we're organizing the meetings. Like, why are we doing it that way? Or like, and notice I'm using a tone here that isn't like, why are we doing that way? Okay, instead, like, let's do a little exploration here. Like, try to figure out why a process is occurring in a certain way, in part because, like, if a coach is not thinking about that, answering that question is helpful. Like, trying to you may prompt some reasoning on the part of your coach that just like, if they are not thinking about that explicitly, it might be helpful for them to do so. And if they are, like, talking about or having some interaction about the processes and just like what that person is doing and why they're doing it the way they are, like, that displays some curiosity about them and their techniques, right? Think about the amount of attention that you are asking people to display about your basic habits and techniques in debate, right? Like, would you agree that you want a lot of attention about those things? Yeah? Like, and that oftentimes you are getting a lot of attention about those things, right? Like, if you think about the amount of time and effort and energy that is going into something like a redo, okay? Or scheduling a practice and like organizing that practice, right? Asking some questions about process, like in the same way that you probably perceive the attention and interest of adults and experienced debaters as like, that is rewarding for me and I'm getting better at that and I care that people care about what I am doing. Like, displaying some care about what and how your coach is doing things is also a reasonable way to have a human relationship, instead of like, the most extreme version of this is like, no coach wants to be treated like a servant, okay? Which can be implied sometimes if it is like, okay, I want you to care in extreme detail about the way that I am doing everything, and I will never ask you a question about what you are doing or why you're doing it, or what you care about, or like what some of your habits are, or just like, why did we do this way, right? So like, displaying some basic human interest in the set of things that they are doing is part of a way of reciprocating all of the interest and expectations and kind of attention to detail that you are expecting on your part. Are we at 8 or 9? 9. I failed to number my document. Talk about needing to learn fundamentals. Okay. 9. This is not all that different from the above, but be gracious. Show some gratitude. Okay? Like, the subpoint on no one wants to be treated like a servant, okay? Like, yes, debate coaches, it is a job, right? And performing that job means doing certain things. But like, in the same way that simply because someone is doing a job doesn't mean that you should treat them poorly, like, you should find opportunities to express thankfulness and gratitude. I guarantee you that coaches will appreciate it. Like, it doesn't need to be obsequious, it doesn't need to be constant, but like, if you are never saying thank you about something that's being done for you, that's not a great sign. Like, and I can guarantee you that the person who is doing a lot for you and never getting thanked for it is gonna notice. You would notice, so they're gonna notice too, right? They are not gonna approach that from the perspective of, because this is my job, I never want anyone to say thank you to me, or I never want anyone to express some gratitude about what I'm doing for them, okay? More, 10. More is not always better. Focused effort and attention is a useful part of coaching. This can be a corrective for the envy that you experience about, like, they have 6 coaches, like, how are we supposed to compete with that? Well, 6 coaches is not always better than 2, okay? Too many cooks in the kitchen is like a real problem with debate strategy. I can name several circumstances to you for high-level debates at Dartmouth where one of the things in reflecting on that debate was like, you know what? There were too many voices trying all at once to make themselves heard. Like, we did not make a decision because we had too many people trying to make that decision together. There was a collective action problem, like, all these voices got in the way of one another, and we didn't make a decision that was right. And so, like, this part of what you can try and do here is, like, you should try and also set some boundaries about what is helpful or explain when something wasn't helpful. Yelling about that in the moment is not generally very effective. Okay, so like, get out of here, leave. I don't like, no, that is not what I'm suggesting. But if after a debate was like, oh, you know, I was talking to 2 or 3 different people, I had a hard time following exactly what was going on, like I was trying to keep track of all of these different things, and like part of the reason that we had difficulty was that we were actually receiving too much input. That can be one, that isn't always number of people either, that could be amount of time, right? It's just like, you all have experienced some degree of how long-winded I can be, right? So like some pre-rounds, it's like, Turner, we've been talking about this part of this argument for 20 minutes. I need to prep something else right now. Like that explained in a way where you have some trust with one another and you can establish those boundaries because that trust is like reasonably well established. That can make it much easier to set limits where it's like you are getting done what you need to get done. Okay. How many of you have had that experience where it's like what seemed like it would be helpful turned into something that was potentially counterproductive because there was either too much information for you to process, too many different voices, or like you felt like you were trying to keep track of too much different stuff? Raise your hand. How many of you have had a conversation about that after that process happened? Okay, so like part of reflecting on the experience of tournaments and on rounds is like the process of, this is also, you see how it fits with asking questions about process. It's like, hey, you know, I felt like this round went a little bit worse because we had a hard time making a decision about what we were doing, or like I couldn't quite process everything that was going on. How do you think that we could approach this differently so that we are a little bit more efficient about what we need to talk about, and then we're done with it and I can sit and do something else? Right? It's like, it doesn't have to be rude, doesn't have to be aggressive, just to like, we are reflecting together on what we've done, right? And like, the fact that you have not asked questions or reflected about that, but probably have spent a lot of time talking about the like, was it this card? Was it this argument, right? It's like, all of those are factors that go into winning a debate, not just the card that you chose or the argument that you read. Last one, cultivate independence. The more categories of things that you are asking for, the more difficult it becomes to provide any one of them. If you constantly want a certain drink, or you always need to take an allergy medication, or you are always trying to get water, or you are always trying to organize a file in a certain way, or you are always trying to get the email or the Slack that like didn't go through that you didn't pay attention to from the prior meeting or the last week, or like just the number of different categories of things in which you are asking for assistance can easily proliferate, okay? Once you are asking for all of those different things, doing any one of them is very difficult. Like, try to cultivate some habits for yourself at a tournament where you need less from other people. They will be able to give you more focused attention on the things that are important if you are not asking them for things that are not that important. Setting some boundaries for yourself on what to expect from other people, right? Like, is it of vital importance that I have XYZ right now, or that I'm talking to the following specific person before every debate, or like, only if I talk to this person about this argument could I like, if you do not cultivate independence, you are cultivating dependence, okay? Like, that the version of this becomes, unless somebody is explaining the following things to me, then I will not be successful, right? You have now set a very specific set of conditions on your success, okay? So like, we're all familiar, I think, with the adage about like feeding someone a fish versus teaching them to fish, okay? Like, as much as possible, you want to encourage your coaches or coach to be teaching you how to fish, not feeding you individual dishes of fish. Cultivating some of your independence is like, that way my coach can focus on the things that are the most important, which are ultimately getting me in a position to succeed, without all of their help on each thing. In particular, because many of the most difficult debate situations that we face are ones where the coach can't be there. If you're debating a new argument that you haven't heard of, your coach can't coach you on it. Like, someone in an important debate, if you're debating at a high level, someone in an important debate is going to read new arguments, potentially produced by other coaches. If you have not cultivated some independence so that you feel confident in a circumstance like that, to like identify, here are the processes that we're going through, here's the work that I've done that might apply to this thing, or like, here's the way in which I've been taught to approach a new argument, okay, all of these process-oriented things, and instead are thinking about like, I lost this debate because I couldn't talk to X person about Y thing right before this round, right? Like, you should be aiming for circumstances where it's like, I am now I have to stand on my own out here exposed to other people's research and work, and I have to be confident in such a situation, because those are ultimately where a lot of the most important debates are going to occur, okay? So, like, setting some limits on what you expect or what you think can be provided, or simulating, like, the other thing too is like, have your coach simulate such a circumstance. Hey, here's something new that somebody could read against you. Here's a 1NC that you haven't heard before that I'm gonna read at you, and I'm not gonna give you any advice about how to answer it until you have, right? Run through some simulations or coach circumstances where someone cannot provide direct coaching, as opposed to only simulating those circumstances where they can. Because they won't always be in that circumstance. Okay, those are my principles. Happy to take a few questions and or, like I said, reflections on when you signed up for an elective with this title. Did this get you some of what you wanted, / is this like in the area that you expected to hear? So I'm open for any of those.
Going back to the asking about process and not just results, I feel like a lot of the time when I ask about the process of how the team runs, I get like short, not really responsive answers.
Okay.
That just dodge the question.
Can you give an example of a question that you have asked in that vein?
I mean, most of it centers around tournament schedules. It's like,
Okay.
Why are we going to these tournaments? Like, we have the budget to go to these other tournaments.
Okay.
And the team would prefer to go to these tournaments. Why is that not happening? And it's sort of just avoided.
Okay.
And it feels hard to like go back and push on that more.
Okay. Do you think that there may be information there that can't be shared with you?
I don't know. I mean, like, parents have investigated, the principals looked into it, and like no one really knows what's going on.
Okay, so like that may be a problem with the way that coach is making some decisions, right? Like, not all of these pieces of advice are designed to deal with all possible scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if a coach is acting in bad faith in terms of tournament scheduling, then it sounds like there are some of these other means that you are pursuing. One other way that I might put that is, like, have you had conversations about, like, when you describe what you want, how are you doing that description? Do you do it in terms of process? So like, here are some of our goals. The way that this set of goals can be achieved, kind of, it means that it is important to get to this set of tournaments, and here's why. Have you had that style of conversation?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, do you feel like there is at least some exchange on, okay, here's how we're gonna make this decision? It sounds like maybe not.
No, I don't think so. It's like, we want to compete like in this way at these tournaments, and it just like never really ends up happening.
Okay, so one other thing that you might pursue there in terms of like talking about other administrative, or talking with or to other administrative figures, is like, are there some workarounds that like are mutually acceptable to all parties? It's like, okay, this coach doesn't need to attend this tournament because a parent chaperone will do so as well, and like, as long as this doesn't interfere with some of the other budgetary constraints, like maybe this is a way to figure that out. Like, it could be that this person doesn't want to attend all of these tournaments because it adds to their tournament schedule. Possibility, but like, I'm not suggesting that asking questions about process is likely to resolve this particular situation, because you have done that already. I do think that it is useful there to reflect on how you're doing it in a way that you like try and be very precise about what you're trying to accomplish and why, rather than start from the premise of accusation.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah.
So, for some context, my debate team is like pretty small to medium sized. We have a coach at school who acts as a supervisor and or chaperone for tournaments. We have a separate coach, which is the one that teaches us content and gives us advice on arguments. And I started to see like a trend at our school, especially in staff and admin. They're not very involved in debate, and therefore they don't see the value in it. So we're kind of pushed to the side when things like going to certain tournaments comes up. How do you think that we can convey like the value of debate to administration, or do certain things so that we have those opportunities to go to certain tournaments?
Okay, so one thing might be to try and build some analogies that help explain debate in ways that are connected to the things that administrative personnel that you are interacting with do seem to value. Okay, so like some suggestions here, right? If there are other competitive activities that the school is heavily invested in, so like various athletic teams, for example, right? Like some of the ways that people justify and approach thinking about athletics, where it's like this works on teamwork, this works on like leadership style skills. This requires discipline and time management because there's a lot of effort that has to go into it. Like it is specialization and practice, like you're learning good habits, right? You can oftentimes try and characterize debate using some of those. It's like, here is an analogy to a thing that you already appreciate. Let me describe why it is that I think that we are achieving some of those similar goals. That can also be like trying to explain the things about debate that are especially exciting or might be challenging, like why does it require coaching? Sitting down to like kind of basically create some arguments about that. So like, why do we need to be coached in this is also something that can sometimes be analogized to athletics. One of my buddies here at Dartmouth is the men's cross-country ski coach, okay? And we have joked that like, no one else really understands either of our job. You know, it's like cross-country skiing is this like, it's a niche activity, it's an important sport here, but like nobody else in administration knows like, if they were to describe like, what does the men's cross-country ski coach do? Like, they would not be able to describe the like, well, to make decisions about what waxes to use on the different skis, they have to observe like there's tons of tacit knowledge that goes into that. Is that, you know, that like, it's knowledge that only comes from experience, okay? Trying to communicate especially the value of this person is able to explain things and talk through things. Like you can give some examples. So like when we show up to a tournament, before some of these debates, we need to have detailed conversations about whether or not semiconductors are subjected to the same intellectual property regime as other aspects of intellectual property, and also be able to talk about whether or not we should treat racism in an intent-based model in the United States or should instead have a structural model for understanding racism. These are things that I've heard a little bit about in class, but when I sit down to debate them, like talking with someone who has been doing research in this area and who knows some of the terminology that we use to debate them, like that is what I am getting out of having this person be at a tournament that is very different than just someone is supervising whether or not we're not running in the halls and we like make sure that we eat lunch. All of those things are very valuable, but not all of them can be done by exactly the same people. You are probably smart enough that you have thought of some of these things already, but just like the analogy part is one that I would consider for trying to explain, like, because debate is so unfamiliar to many people, like trying to give them an entryway into like thinking about some of these things. Or like the other thing too is sometimes people being surprised about how like esoteric or complex policy debates, like I can't understand a debate, so like how could that be helpful? I thought this would sound like a presidential debate. It's like, well, if you are watching one of these other complex athletic activities, would you expect the commentators to be commenting on stuff that everybody could do or that everybody can automatically understand? Like if you're watching an NBA level offense, could you really sit down and like, okay, we're gonna coach, like, here's our offense. Like I've developed it because I've watched basketball. I just know how to like design this incredibly complex set of moving parts and like make it all work. So like some of these process things, try and draw an analogy to just because you can't immediately understand it doesn't make it less valuable, it might make it more valuable. I don't know, is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Well, this is kind of related, but like, how would you recommend getting coaching out of just like, I don't know, my school doesn't have like a debate class or like center debate. It's like a club that meets every like 1 or 2 weeks. But so like, how would you recommend getting more out of like friends that like do debate, that maybe do other styles of debate, maybe do other, just completely other things. But how would you recommend like cross-applying some things or like learning out of stuff that isn't necessarily policy debate?
Yeah, like I didn't talk very much about kind of your peers are also your coaches, right? Like one of the ways to do that is basically like try and explain something, like the kind of that sounding board idea. Like a lot of practicing debate is practicing how to get good at explaining something. If you're explaining something to someone and like they don't have all of the background context for getting it, particularly if you're working on something that is difficult, that is actually a very useful audience to hear their reaction, right? It's just like, and you can do that in like trying to cross some genres or whatever. You could either, like there are 2 versions of this, you probably can benefit from both. One is to try and do the explanation without any of the terminology or jargon that might get in the way, right? So like, if somebody is in a different style of debate where they're giving speeches and not debating, like trying to explain something to them in a way that doesn't use the words, you know, link, impact, alternative, whatever, right? Like give that a shot, see if you can get through, and like that oftentimes helps you then unpack, okay, now I need to retranslate those into some of the terms, but like most of the time, most debaters are using too many debate terms and not enough substantive stuff that comes from their argument. So like that's actually very helpful practice. The second aspect of this, which is, you know, a little bit the opposite, is try to talk, like if part of what's going on is like, oh, when you debate, like this theory argument in this, you know, format means this other thing, or like we use this word for this thing. Sometimes talking about those differences is very, when I was talking about kind of like fundamentals are oftentimes the most difficult things to master, okay? Like think about competition, okay? Like explaining competition, there are a bunch of electives about it, you've probably spent a bunch of time on it in lab, right? It is a thing that policy debate does differently than almost anything else. Spending some time with, if you've got another debate nerdy friend who's like not doing this format but is interested in debate, like try and exchange a version of that. It's like, I'm gonna try and explain what competition is to you and get cross-exed on it, and you're gonna try and explain, you know, what a value criterion is to me, and I'm gonna cross-ex you about it. Like, you can have some of those exchanges because fundamentals are important and sometimes oftentimes difficult to explain or translate. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Other questions? We can also go to lunch. Okay. Just quick kind of feedback on, is roughly in the genre of what you expected to hear about / is useful for thinking about this stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Enjoy lunch. Enjoy lab this afternoon. I'll see you all later.